Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Genesis chapter 20 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're about to look closely at a profoundly dramatic chapter in the biblical narrative. Imagine for just a second a husband and wife who have journeyed far from their home. They're navigating the unpredictable and honestly often dangerous political landscape of the ancient Near East. So they enter a totally new territory, an unfamiliar kingdom. And out of this deep-seated, desperate fear for his own survival, the husband makes a calculated, yet incredibly risky decision. He tells a half-truth. And that one little half-truth inadvertently sets off a massive, explosive crisis. His wife is taken into the harem of a powerful foreign king, and suddenly the fate of not just these three people, but literally an entire kingdom, hangs in the balance. This is exactly the intense dramatic tension we find right here in Genesis chapter 20, involving the patriarch Abraham, his wife Sarah, and the local ruler, King Abimelech. It's an amazing story full of deception, divine intervention, confrontation, and ultimately restitution. We're going to unpack the simple, literal meaning of this text, what we call the pashhat, to see exactly what happens, why it happens, and what practical lessons we can take away from it today.
Before we jump right into the first verse, let's just establish a little bit of brief context so we know exactly where this chapter fits into the overarching story. Abraham has been on a really long journey, both physically and spiritually. In the chapters right before this, he received these profound promises from God about becoming a great nation, and he literally just witnessed the catastrophic fiery destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now the narrative shifts geographically, and the tone changes completely. Abraham is moving his entire household, we're talking his family, his servants, his massive flocks and herds, further to the south. He's leaving the area he was in and stepping right into the foreign territory of a city-state called Gerar. Now you have to understand, this isn't just a simple change of address. It's a move into an environment controlled by a totally different king with completely different customs. Naturally, this sets the stage for a massive feeling of vulnerability. As we read through this chapter, keep in mind that Abraham is an outsider here. He's a sojourner in a land where he has absolutely no inherent political power and no local protection. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at the journey to Gerar, God's warning to Abimelech, the royal confrontation, Abraham's explanation, the final restitution and healing, and we'll wrap up with some key lessons and takeaways. Let's dive right in. Section 1, the journey to Gerar, moving to the Negev. Verses 1 and 2 tell us Abraham moved his massive nomadic encampment toward the south, settling temporarily between Kadesh and Shur, and then eventually in Gerar. Now this was an ancient Philistine city ruled by King Abimelech. And in the ancient world, crossing the border into a new king's territory meant you were basically entirely at their mercy. And that's a vulnerability that drives exactly what happens in the very next verse. To really get the physical and cultural setting of this new environment, let's clarify the geography mentioned in verse 1. The text says Abraham moved into the region of the Negev. Now, the Negev is this vast, arid, southern desert region of Canaan. It's a harsh landscape, you know? Water is incredibly scarce, and surviving there requires serious resilience. Moving a massive camp of livestock and people into or around the Negev usually meant you were desperately searching for pasture, or maybe moving away from a famine or a conflict somewhere else. Gerar itself was situated in the northwestern part of this broader southern region, making it kind of like an oasis, a little hub of civilization and agriculture in an otherwise really challenging terrain. But by moving here, Abraham is bringing his family into direct contact with the local inhabitants and their ruler, King Abimelech. And the cultural norm of the day? Well, a powerful king could essentially take whatever or whoever he wanted from a vulnerable, wandering foreigner. And that brings us to verse 2. Because of this extreme vulnerability, Abraham makes a highly calculated defensive move. The text neutrally reports this, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. Notice how incredibly matter-of-fact the text is here. There's no long, dramatic, emotional monologue. It just states the action. Abraham declares Sarah is his sister. Why do this? Well, because if the local people know she is his wife and they decide they want her, the easiest way to get her is to just murder the husband. Get him out of the way. But if she's his sister, they have to negotiate with him, the brother, to arrange a marriage. Theoretically, this gives Abraham time to stall or maybe figure out an escape route. But this strategy backfires instantly. King Abimelech doesn't just admire Sarah from afar. He exerts his royal authority right then and there. He sends for her and takes her into his household to be part of his harem. So the deception worked to keep Abraham alive, sure, but it completely failed to protect Sarah. The crisis has officially begun.
Section 2. God's warning to Abimelech, a dream in the night. With Sarah taken, Abraham is completely helpless, but God steps in. In verse 3, the narrative abruptly shifts from human action to divine intervention. God doesn't send an army to fix this. He appears directly to the foreign king in a terrifying nighttime dream to stop a grave injustice from happening.
Let's look exactly at what the text says. In verse 3, God comes to Abimelech in a dream of the night and delivers a severe, totally unambiguous warning. God says to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Or if we look at the older Jewish Publication Society translation, it reads, "Behold, thou shalt die because of the woman whom thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife." I mean, wow, this is not a gentle slap on the wrist. This is the creator of the universe telling a wildly powerful earthly king that his life is entirely forfeit because he has crossed a fundamental moral boundary. He has taken another man's wife. In the biblical worldview, marriage is sacred, and violating it, even unknowingly, carries immense gravity. The divine intervention here is swift and absolute. Think about it. Abimelech went to sleep as a comfortable, powerful monarch, and he wakes up, or rather is interrupted mid-sleep, with a literal death sentence hanging over his head.
Now notice how Abimelech responds in verses 4 through 6. The text explicitly tells us that Abimelech had not gone near her. He hadn't touched Sarah. So the king boldly defends himself directly to God. He asks, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation?" He points out the hard facts. He says, "Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And didn't she also say, 'He is my brother'?" Abimelech pleads that he acted in the total simplicity of his heart and the innocency of his hands. He took her, yes, but only because both Abraham and Sarah explicitly lied to him. He was completely unwitting in this. And God's response is actually fascinating. God essentially says, "I agree with you." God actually acknowledges Abimelech's clear conscience. In verse 6, God says, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her." God reveals that he was actively working behind the scenes the whole time, physically or circumstantially restraining Abimelech. He was protecting both Sarah from violation and protecting Abimelech from committing a fatal sin. Having established Abimelech's relative innocence, God then lays down a very strict ultimatum in verse 7. God tells the king, "Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die." Here we need to pause and clarify an incredibly important Hebrew word, navi, which translates to prophet. Actually, fun fact, this is the very first time the word prophet is used in the entire Torah. And how is it being used? Not as someone who predicts the future, but as an intercessor, someone who has a close relationship with God and can pray on behalf of others. Despite Abraham's obvious moral failure in lying, God still identifies him as his chosen representative, a navi. The instruction to Abimelech is brutally clear. Return Sarah, have the prophet pray for you, and you survive. Keep her, and you, your family, and your whole kingdom will face death. There's absolutely no middle ground here.
Section 3. The Royal Confrontation. The morning after. In verses 8 through 10, a completely terrified Abimelech summons his equally frightened officials. Realizing they've just stepped into a deadly trap, the king immediately calls for the man responsible. The tables have totally turned. The powerful king is now demanding an explanation from the wandering foreigner.
In verses 9 and 10, Abimelech does not hold back. With complete righteous indignation, he looks right at Abraham and asks a series of direct and honestly deeply justified questions. What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should not be done. And finally he asks, what was your reason for doing this? If we look at this neutrally, just completely based on the text, Abimelech absolutely has the moral high ground here. He is rightfully outraged. He welcomed these foreigners, and in return, they brought a literal deadly curse upon his house through a lie. The king is essentially asking, why would you endanger innocent people? What on earth were you thinking? He demands a clear accounting from this man of God, whose actions have proven to be surprisingly deceptive. Section 4, Abraham explains his actions. Explaining the deception. Faced with this justified anger, Abraham lays out his defense in verses 11 through 13. He doesn't try to deny the deception. Instead, he admits his actions were driven by one profound emotion, absolute fear. Let's look at the simple, text-based irony of Abraham's assumption here. In verse 11, Abraham replies to the king, "I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife." You see, Abraham had looked at this foreign land, at Gerar,
and he prejudged the entire population. He just assumed they were lawless, godless murderers who would casually slaughter a man just to take his wife. But contrast Abraham's assumption with the actual reality we just saw. Abimelech, the foreign king, had literally just told God he acted with a clear conscience and clean hands, and God agreed with him. The people of Gerar were actually far more moral and God-fearing than Abraham had ever given them credit for. The irony is so thick here. The chosen man of God lied because he lacked faith in the morality of the locals, while the local pagan king acted with far greater integrity than the prophet anticipated. It's a really powerful reminder straight from the text about the danger of assuming the worst about people who are just different from us. So, what are the specific, literal details of Abraham's defense? Well, he breaks it down into 3 main points. First, as we just saw, he was terrified for his life. Second, in verse 12, he reveals a technical truth. He says, "Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife." Now, in the ancient world, and specifically before the later laws of the Torah were given at Mount Sinai, marrying a half-sister was not an uncommon practice. So Abraham argues that his statement, "she is my sister," wasn't a total lie, but a half-truth. However, let's be real, a half-truth designed to deceive is still a deception. Third, in verse 13, he explains this wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment panic. It was actually a prearranged survival strategy. He says that when God caused him to wander from his father's house years ago, he asked Sarah to show him this specific kindness, everywhere they go, to say, "He is my brother." This was literally their standard operating procedure whenever they entered dangerous territory.
Section 5, Restitution and Healing, Making Things Right. The truth is finally out, but the immense danger still remains. Now, Abimelech could have easily banished or even executed Abraham for this, but instead, the situation is resolved through immense practical restitution. Let's see exactly how he does it. Look at the heavy wealth Abimelech pours out in verses 14 through 16. First and foremost, he completely restores Sarah to Abraham, totally untouched, but he certainly doesn't stop there. He gives Abraham sheep, oxen, male servants, and female servants. He explicitly tells Abraham, "My land is before you, live wherever you like." He grants them full residency rights. And then he speaks directly to Sarah. He says he is giving her brother, and notice he uses the word brother there, probably with a bit of a pointed irony, 1,000 pieces of silver. Abimelech explains that this silver is to serve as a covering of the eyes to all who are with her. This is such a brilliant cultural detail. The wealth serves as a public vindication. It proves to absolutely everyone who might have gossiped or assumed the worst that Sarah's honor is fully intact, that she was never violated, and that the king is publicly making amends for having taken her in the first place. He is completely clearing her name and his own all at once. Let's walk step by step through the concluding verses of the chapter, verses 17 and 18, to see how the divine ultimatum from the dream is finally fulfilled. Step 1, Abimelech obeys God completely. He restores Sarah safely, and as we just saw, adds immense wealth to prove his innocence. Step 2, Abraham steps up into his role as a Navi, a prophet. The text says, "Then Abraham prayed to God." Despite his own flaws and his major role in actually causing the problem, Abraham intercedes for the king. Step 3, the immediate consequence of that prayer is divine healing. God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his slave girls so they could have children again. We learn in the final verse, verse 18, that the specific plague God had struck them with was that he had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. The threat to Sarah's purity and to the promised seed of Abraham had resulted in a complete and total halt of fertility in Gerar. But through Abimelech's honest restitution and Abraham's sincere prayer, the plague is lifted and life is restored. Section 6, Key Lessons and Takeaways, Applying the Narrative. We've walked through the literal events of chapter 20, but this isn't just some ancient historical record. It holds profound lessons about human nature and how we all interact under stress. Let's look at the practical takeaways. First, we clearly see the unseen consequences of half-truths. Abraham's technical truth that Sarah was his half-sister absolutely did not protect them. It endangered innocent people and brought a plague on an entire kingdom. Deception, even when it's born out of self-preservation, often has explosive collateral damage. Second, we see God's incredible protection in vulnerable moments. Even when Abraham messed up, God actively intervened to protect Sarah and the future he had promised them, and he even protected Abimelech from unwittingly committing a terrible sin. Third, the story beautifully models making things right through full restitution. Abimelech didn't just offer a quick, cheap apology. He made public, costly amends to clear Sarah's name and restore the relationship. And finally, we see the profound power of praying for others. Abraham had wronged the king, yet God still required Abraham to pray for Abimelech's healing. It shows that God deeply values intercession and reconciliation, even between flawed individuals. So, to quickly recap the whole thing, Abraham and Sarah moved to a new land, feared for their lives, and used a half-truth just to survive. King Abimelech innocently took Sarah, but God intervened with a terrifying warning in a dream. The king confronted Abraham, made massive public restitution, and through Abraham's prayer, the kingdom was healed. It's a dramatic cycle of fear, failure, divine grace, and restoration. And it leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. How do our own fears shape our actions? And how can we choose honesty even when we feel incredibly vulnerable? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.